Picture a dawn in 1885, where the air at Barrow's ranch chokes with dust and despair, and an Apache man named Elias, scarred by a life of survival, locks eyes with Clara, a woman hauling sacks so heavy they bend her spine, yet her spirit refuses to break. They're strangers in a brutal world, bound by one fleeting offer. Let me carry that. But when the ranch's ruthless owner sets his sights on Clara, a secret from a bloody past threatens to bury them both. Will they outrun the shadows or forge a bond stronger than the land itself? This story's ending has left millions breathless. Stay to uncover why a single horse and a hidden truth redefine freedom. If this stirs your soul, hit subscribe, share your city or country below, and let's unravel the mystery together. What happens when the sun rises over Cottonwood Creek? You'll want to find out. The sun hadn't yet clawed its way over the Red Rock Hills when Barrow's ranch stirred, alive with the crack of whips and the restless clatter of hooves. Dust hung thick, a gritty veil that burned the lungs and coated the throat. Elias, an Apache man of 32, stepped through the haze toward the ranch gate, his boots crunching on hard-packed earth. Tall and lean, his frame was carved by years of labor that paid in calluses, not coin. His skin, dark and weathered, bore the sun's relentless brand. His hair, tied low, swayed like a shadow. No gun hung at his hip, a choice, not a mistake. In a land where trust was scarcer than water, an unarmed man drew less trouble. The gate loomed, rough-hewn and splintered, flanked by a corral where horses snorted and stamped, their breath steaming in the chill dawn. Elias stopped short, hands loose at his sides. He'd learned young never to cross a threshold uninvited. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the sprawl of Barrow's domain. Weathered adobe barns, sagging fences, and a main house squatting under a tin roof that gleamed like a blade. This was no place for dreams, only survival. A foreman emerged, his boots scuffing the dirt, a wad of tobacco bulging his cheek. His gaze raked Elias, lingering on the Apache's high cheekbones and steady stare. "What's your business?" he spat, voice thick with suspicion. "Work," Elias said, his tone even, accent faint but unmistakable. "I know horses." The foreman snorted, spitting a dark stream into the dust. "Every drifter claims that. What makes you worth my time? I smell fever in a colt before it limps. I can gentle a stallion that's ready to crush a man's skull. Stalls I clean, stay free of rot." Elias's words were clipped, deliberate, like stones laid in a row. The foreman's eyes narrowed, but he didn't laugh. "Wait here." He trudged toward the main house, leaving Elias under the weight of the rising sun. Minutes dragged, the heat already prickling his neck. Then the foreman returned, jerking his thumb toward the stables. "You're on trial. One lame horse, and you're out." Elias nodded, stepping through the gate into a world that didn't want him. The stables were a low, dim cavern, reeking of manure and damp straw. He set to work, hauling buckets that weighed like anvils, scrubbing boards until his knuckles bled. The other hands, sunken-eyed men and women with bent backs, cast sidelong glances but said nothing. Silence was safer here. It was mid-morning when he saw her. Across a field of cracked earth and wilted turnips, Clara moved like a specter, dragging a burlap sack nearly as wide as her shoulders. It had to weigh 80 pounds, maybe more, its bulk forcing her spine into a painful curve. Her dress, faded to the color of ash, clung to her sweat-soaked frame. Her boots, caked with mud, sank into the dirt with each step. She was thin, too thin for such work, her face streaked with grime, strands of hair plastered to her cheeks. Yet her jaw was set, her eyes fixed forward, as if the sack were a challenge she'd sworn to conquer. Elias paused, leaning on his shovel, watching her slow, stubborn march. The sack wobbled, threatening to slip. She caught it, breath hissing through clenched teeth, and kept going. Something tightened in his chest, not pity, but recognition. She wasn't just tired, she was alone, carrying a weight no one else would touch. Without thinking, he crossed the field, his shadow falling over her path. "Let me take that," he said, voice low, reaching for the strap. Clara's head snapped up, eyes flashing like a cornered animal's. "No," she said, sharp enough to cut. Her voice held no pride, only a hard-learned truth. Nothing came free at Barrow's ranch. Elias lowered his hand, meeting her gaze. "As you wish." He stepped back, but her words lingered, heavy as the sack she bore. "I do my own work," she muttered, muscles trembling as she passed. He watched her go, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not weak, he thought, just forged in a fire most couldn't survive. By noon, the sun was a hammer, beating the earth into submission. Elias returned to the stables, the ache in his arms a familiar companion. Clara's silhouette stayed with him, a question mark etched in dust and defiance. He didn't know her story, but he knew the look of someone running from something, or toward it. In a place like Barrow's, either could get you killed. Clara's shadow had burned itself into Elias's mind, a stubborn flame flickering against the brutal noon glare of Barrow's ranch. He shoveled manure in the stables, the air thick with the stench of sweat and decay. But his thoughts drifted to her, those fierce eyes, that sack dragging her toward the earth. By dusk, the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the creak of warped barn doors. Elias lay on a straw pallet, the ache in his bones, a dull reminder of the day's labor, wondering what drove a woman like Clara to carry such weight alone. The next morning, a blood-red dawn bled across the horizon, painting the adobe barns in hues of rust and fire. Elias was already at work, hauling water buckets that sloshed with each step, their weight tugging at his shoulders. The other hands moved like ghosts, heads bowed, voices hushed. Fear hung heavier than the dust, and Elias felt it too. The unspoken rule that eyes met the ground when Harlan Barrow, the ranch's iron-fisted owner, passed by. Harlan's shadow loomed large, his polished boots and silver spurs a stark contrast to the ragged workers. His voice, smooth as snake oil, could turn venomous in a heartbeat. Elias was brushing down a skittish mare when he caught sight of Clara again, this time near the hayshed. She wrestled with a bale, its twine cutting into her palms, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The bale slipped, and she stumbled, catching herself against a post. A pair of hands, rough men with leering grins, watched from the shade, their laughter low and cruel. "Keep going, girl," one called. "Ain't no one carrying that for you." Clara's jaw tightened, and she heaved the bale again, blood smearing the twine where it bit her skin. Elias's grip on the brush tightened, but he stayed put. Her words from yesterday, "I do my own work," rang like a warning. Instead, he turned to the mare, whispering low to calm its twitching ears, though his eyes flicked back to Clara. She reached the shed, dropping the bale with a thud, her chest heaving. For a moment, their gazes locked across the yard, her expression unreadable but raw, like a wound left to fester. That night, a storm rolled in, sudden and merciless. Thunder cracked like a whip, and rain lashed the ranch, turning the yard to a sea of mud. Elias woke to the sound of water where it didn't belong, a steady drip echoing from the workers' quarters. He pulled on his boots, the cold biting his skin, and stepped into the downpour. Lightning lit the sky, revealing a sagging roof over Clara's shack, water streaming through a jagged hole. Inside, she stood barefoot, shoving her thin blanket away from the spreading puddle, her hair dripping, face pale with exhaustion. Elias didn't ask. He grabbed a lantern from the tack shed, its flame sputtering in the wind, and climbed the slick ladder to the roof. Rain stung his face, blurring his vision as he worked, nailing scrap wood over the gap, sealing it with tar stolen from Harlan's stores. His hands moved by instinct, fingers numb, arms burning from the strain. When he slid down, soaked to the bone, Clara stood at the door, holding the lantern. "You didn't have to," she said, voice barely audible over the storm. "I know," Elias replied, wiping rain from his eyes. Her gaze held his, searching, and for the first time, he saw something shift, doubt giving way to curiosity. "I thought Apache men were trouble," she said, almost to herself. "That's what they say." Elias shrugged, water dripping from his hair. "They say a lot of things. Most of it lies." Clara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry." She paused, then added, "That day in the field, I didn't mean to snap." "Folks don't survive here by trusting easily," Elias said. "I get it." She nodded, the lantern casting shadows across her face. "Clara," she said, offering her name like a hard-won gift. "Elias." The rain slowed, a faint patter now, and in that fragile quiet, something unspoken took root. But the moment was shattered when a figure loomed at the edge of the yard, Harlan, his silhouette sharp against the flickering light. He'd been watching Clara too closely lately, his offers of easier work laced with a hunger that made her flinch. Today he'd called her to the main house, his voice too smooth, his eyes lingering too long. "Think about it," he'd said, hand brushing her arm. "Life could be softer for you." Clara had pulled away, her refusal sharp, but Harlan's smile only grew colder. Now, as he stood in the storm, his gaze flicked between her and Elias, a warning carved in his stare. Elias felt the weight of it, a noose tightening. Clara's hand tightened on the lantern, her breath catching. "Come morning," Harlan called, voice cutting through the rain. "We'll talk, Clara. You don't want to keep me waiting." He turned, vanishing into the dark, leaving a chill that no storm could match. Elias met Clara's eyes, seeing fear, but also defiance. "What's he want with you?" he asked, voice low. Clara's jaw set. "Nothing. I'll give him. But he doesn't take no lightly." Elias nodded, the truth settling like lead in his gut. Barrow's ranch was a trap, and Clara was its latest prey. But as he walked back to the stables, her name, Clara, echoed in his mind, a spark in the dark. He didn't know her past, but he'd heard whispers of a wagon train massacre years ago, a brother lost, and secrets buried under Harlan's wealth. Whatever Clara carried, it was heavier than any bale, and Elias felt the pull to share its weight, whether she'd let him or not. The weight of Harlan's warning clung to Elias like damp rot, a shadow that followed him through the mud-slick yard back to the stables. Clara's name pulsed in his chest, a quiet spark against the cold dread of what Barrow's ranch might demand next. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a sky bruised purple and a heat that pressed down like a fist. The air at the ranch crackled with tension, sharp as the snap of a whip. Elias worked in the corral, checking hooves for stones, his hands steady, but his mind restless. Harlan's men prowled closer than usual, their eyes glinting with the promise of trouble. Whispers slithered among the hands. Clara had been seen leaving the main house at dawn, her face tight, Harlan's laughter trailing her like a predator's scent. Elias caught fragments of talk. Harlan's offers were turning to demands, his patience fraying. The other workers kept their heads down, but fear was a contagion, and it spread fast. Clara appeared mid-morning, hauling a crate of feed across the yard. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms corded from labor, but her steps were deliberate, slower than before. A fresh bruise bloomed on her wrist, faint but unmistakable, half hidden by her cuff. Elias's stomach twisted, his fingers tightening around the curry comb. He wanted to ask, to act, but her words from the storm, "He don't take no lightly," held him back. Instead, he watched, noting how she avoided the main house, her gaze darting like a deer sensing a trap. By afternoon, the sun scorched the earth, bleaching the fields bone white. Elias was mending a fence when Harlan's voice cut through the haze, calling Clara to the porch. She went, shoulders squared, but her hands clenched at her sides. Harlan leaned close, his words too low to hear, his hand grazing her shoulder. Clara flinched, stepping back, her voice sharp but controlled. "I said no, Mr. Barrow. That's final." Harlan's smile was a blade, thin and cold. "You'll change your mind," he said, loud enough for the yard to hear. "Folks like you always do." Clara walked away, her face a mask, but Elias saw the tremor in her hands. She passed him without a word, heading for the barn, where she began stacking hay with a fury that bordered on reckless. Elias followed, keeping his distance, and set to work nearby, splitting logs for a new stall. Their silence was heavy, broken only by the thud of her bales and the crack of his axe. Finally, she spoke, voice low. "He thinks he owns me. Thinks he owns everyone." Elias drove the axe into a log, pausing. "He doesn't own you, but he'll try to break you." Her eyes met his, raw and searching. "You ever run from a man like that?" "Running's just another cage," Elias said. "You gotta choose when to fight." She nodded, stacking another bale, but her movement slowed, as if his words had stirred something buried. "I saw something," she whispered, glancing at the barn door. "In his office. Papers, land deeds, gold receipts. They're tied to a massacre years back. My brother." Her voice cracked, and she stopped, swallowing hard. Harlan's hands ain't clean. Elias's pulse quickened. The whispers of a wagon train slaughter in '78 weren't new, but Clara's words gave them weight. "You got proof?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "But I know where to look." Night fell, starless and suffocating. The ranch felt like a coiled snake ready to strike. Elias lay awake, the straw beneath him sharp as guilt. Clara's secret burned in his mind, proof that could topple Harlan, or bury them both. He'd spent years dodging fights, staying invisible, but her defiance was pulling him toward a line he'd sworn never to cross. Then it came, a scream, raw and desperate, slicing through the dark from the barn. Elias was on his feet in an instant, boots hitting the ground before his mind caught up. He sprinted across the yard, the air thick with the smell of hay and menace. The barn door hung ajar, and inside, Harlan loomed over Clara, his hand gripping her arm, her dress torn at the shoulder. You'll learn," he snarled, voice slurred with whiskey. Elias didn't think. He charged, fist connecting with Harlan's jaw, sending him sprawling into a pile of feed sacks. Clara gasped, stumbling back, her eyes wide with fear and relief. Harlan roared, lunging, but Elias was faster, landing another blow that drew blood. The fight was short, brutal, and ended with Harlan on the ground, spitting curses. "You're dead, Apache," he growled, clutching his face. Elias turned to Clara, chest heaving. "You hurt?" She shook her head, trembling. "I screamed. Thought no one had come." "I did," he said, voice steady despite the storm in his veins. As they stood there, the barn's shadows closing in, a truth settled between them. This wasn't just a fight, it was a declaration. If this story's grip on you is tightening, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who'd feel the same. Let's keep this tale alive, because what happens next will shake the dust from your boots." But the barn wasn't empty. Footsteps crunched outside, and Harlan's men appeared, their faces hard with loyalty to their boss. Elias grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the door, but the men blocked the way, fists clenched, ready to make an example of the Apache who dared to strike their king. Harlan's men closed in, their boots grinding the barn's dirt floor, faces carved with the kind of loyalty that thrived on blood. Elias held Clara's hand, her pulse racing under his grip, but the door was a lost hope, blocked by fists and snarls. The air turned thick, heavy with the promise of pain, and Elias knew the cost of his choice was coming due. Dawn broke over Barrow's ranch like a cracked bone, pale and jagged. Elias woke on the cold earth outside the barn, his ribs screaming, face swollen, blood crusted along his lip. The beating had been swift and merciless. Fists, boots, and a rifle butt that left his vision swimming. Clara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a damp cloth to his cheek. Her eyes were red, her dress still torn, but her jaw was set, defiance holding her upright. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered, voice raw. "Not for me." Elias winced, spitting blood into the dust. "Wasn't just for you," he said, voice hoarse. "Some things ain't worth letting stand." She shook her head, cleaning a cut above his eye. "They'll kill you now. Harlan doesn't forgive." The yard was quiet, the other hand slinking away, their silence louder than any curse. Harlan had watched the beating from the porch, his bruised jaw wrapped in a bandage, eyes glittering with satisfaction. "That's your lesson," he'd said before turning away. "Cross me again, and you're buzzard food." Now, the ranch felt like a noose tightening, each creak of the fence a warning. Clara helped Elias sit up, her touch careful but firm. "We gotta leave," she said, voice low. "Before he decides a beating ain't enough." Elias nodded, though every movement was fire in his bones. "Where to? Ain't no town round here that don't bow to Barrow." Her eyes flickered, a spark of something fierce. "Anywhere but here. I ain't dying under his thumb." By noon, the sun was a relentless hammer, baking the earth into cracked clay. Elias leaned against a post, trying to breathe shallow to ease his ribs, while Clara gathered her things from the workers' quarters. A spare dress, a comb that had been her mother's, a scrap of paper with her brother's name scrawled in faded ink. Remnants of a life ground down by Barrow's greed. She moved fast, her steps sharp, as if outrunning the fear that clung to her like dust. But Harlan wasn't done. He summoned Clara to the main house, his voice carrying across the yard like a snake's hiss. Elias watched her go, his hands clenching despite the pain. On the porch, Harlan stood with his wife, Margaret, a tall woman with a face sharp as flint, her black dress swallowing the light. "You've caused enough trouble," Margaret said, her voice cold enough to frost the air. "You and that Apache." Clara stood straight, though her hands shook. "I didn't ask for trouble. Your husband brought it." Harlan's laugh was low, venomous. "She tried to seduce me," he said, loud enough for the hands to hear. "When I refused, her dog attacked me." Clara's breath caught, rage flashing in her eyes. "That's a lie," she said. "You came for me. You tore my dress." Margaret raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough." Her gaze cut through Clara, appraising, merciless. "Is this true?" she asked the gathered workers, their faces blank, eyes fixed on the ground. No one spoke. The silence was a blade, and it cut deep. Margaret stepped forward, her hand cracking across Clara's face, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "You shame this house," she said. "You're dismissed. Leave by sundown. Take nothing." Clara swayed, tasting blood, but didn't fall. Elias tried to move, to stand, but two of Harlan's men blocked him, their hands on their belts. "You're done too," Margaret said, not looking at him. "Both of you, gone." Harlan's eyes gleamed, a predator savoring the kill. "Be grateful I don't bury you where you stand." Clara returned to the quarters, her cheek red, her movements mechanical. Elias waited by the fence, his body a map of bruises, his mind racing. Leaving was survival, but it felt like surrender. "We ain't got much time," he said when she emerged, her bundle small enough to break a man's heart. "I know," she said, her voice steady now, though her eyes were wet. "But I ain't leaving empty-handed." She glanced at the far corral, where Harlan's prize stallion, a sleek black beast, grazed under the fading light. Elias followed her gaze, a grim smile tugging at his split lip. "That one," he said, reading her mind. They moved at dusk, shadows their only allies. Elias limped to the corral, his ribs protesting, and whispered to the stallion, his voice low and familiar. The horse came willingly, sensing freedom in the air. Clara tied her bundle to its back, her hands quick despite the tremble. They mounted, her arms tight around Elias's waist, and rode hard into the night, the ranch's lights fading behind them. The grassland stretched endlessly, cold and unforgiving, the stars hidden by clouds. Exhaustion clawed at them, but fear drove them on. By a dry creek bed, they stopped, the stallion's breath steaming. Clara slid to the ground, her face pale. "They'll come for us," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Harlan won't let this go." Elias dismounted, wincing, and touched her shoulder. "Let 'em come. We ain't his anymore." She met his eyes, tears spilling over. "You should have left me. I'm a curse." He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the bruise Margaret had left. "Where you go, I go," he said, the words a vow carved in pain. They sat by the creek, the stallion grazing nearby, the night swallowing their tracks. Clara's hand found his, her grip fierce despite her fear. "I saw those papers," she said, voice steadying. "They're still in his office. Proof of what he did. My brother. The massacre. If we get him, he's finished." Elias nodded, the spark of her defiance catching in his chest. "Then we go back," he said. "But not tonight." The darkness closed in, heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. They were free, but freedom was a fragile thing, and Barrow's shadow was long. The night by the creek bed stretched long and cold. Clara's words about Harlan's papers, a ledger of blood and greed, burning like a brand in Elias's mind. They were fugitives now, marked by a stolen horse and a vow to return, but the open grassland offered no promises, only the faint hope of a fight not yet lost. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the Cottonwood Creek Valley in shades of gold and sage, a land untouched by Barrow's shadow. Elias and Clara rode south, the stallion's hooves kicking up dust that shimmered in the early light. Pain stitched Elias's ribs with every jolt, but he kept his eyes on the rolling hills, searching for a place to rest, to plan. Clara clung to his back, her silence heavy, her grip tight, as if anchoring herself against the fear of pursuit. By midday, they found a hollow near the creek, shaded by cottonwoods, its banks soft with wild grass. They dismounted, the stallion grazing as Clara knelt to drink, her reflection rippling in the shallow water. "This'll do," Elias said, scanning the valley. "For now." Clara nodded, her face gaunt but resolute. "We can't stay long. Those papers, if we don't get 'em, he'll hunt us till we're bones." Elias crouched beside her, his bruised hand sifting the creek's pebbles. "We go back when we're ready, not before." His voice was steady, but the weight of their task pressed hard. sneaking into Barrow's lair, stealing proof of a massacre, and escaping alive. They built a lean-to from branches and hides, its frame crude but sturdy. Clara scouted the creek, learning its bends and shallows, while Elias tended the stallion, whispering to keep it calm. At night, they sat by a low fire, the flames casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Clara spoke of her brother, killed in the 78 wagon train ambush, his name etched on that scrap of paper she carried. Harlan's gold came from that blood, she said, voice low. Them papers prove it. Deeds, payoffs, names of men who pulled triggers. Elias stared into the fire, the heat stinging his swollen eye. Proof don't mean justice, not with men like him. Maybe not, Clara said, her eyes fierce, but it means ruin. That's enough. 2 days later, under a moonless sky, they rode back to Barrow's ranch, hearts pounding like war drums. The stallion moved silent, a shadow among shadows, as they approached the ranch's edge. Elias tethered the horse in a dry gully, his ribs aching but his resolve iron. Clara led the way, her steps sure despite the tremble in her hands. The office was in the main house, a locked room Harlan guarded like a dragon's hoard. They crept through the yard, past sleeping dogs and drunken hands, the air thick with the scent of hay and whiskey. Inside, the house was a maze of creaking floors and lamplight. Clara's memory guided them to a heavy oak door, its lock old but stubborn. Elias worked a knife blade, his hand steady despite the pain, until the lock gave with a soft click. The office smelled of leather and ink, papers strewn across a desk. Clara rifled through them, her breath quick, until she found it. A ledger, its pages scrawled with dates, sums, and the names of dead men, her brothers among them. "This is it," she whispered, tucking it under her arm. But a floorboard groaned outside. Harlan's voice, slurred but sharp, cut through the dark. "Who's there?" Footsteps thudded closer. Elias grabbed Clara, pulling her behind a cabinet as the door swung open. Harlan stood silhouetted, a pistol glinting in his hand. "I smell you," he growled, eyes scanning the room. Clara's hand tightened on the ledger, her breath shallow. Elias pressed a finger to his lips, his free hand on his knife. Harlan stepped closer, the pistol sweeping the shadows. For a heartbeat, it seemed he'd pass. Then his boot kicked the desk, and a loose paper fluttered to the floor. His eyes narrowed, locking on their hiding place. Elias moved first, lunging low, tackling Harlan before the gun could fire. The men crashed into the desk, papers scattering, the pistol skidding across the floor. Clara scrambled for it, her hand shaking as she aimed at Harlan, who wrestled free, blood on his lip. "You're dead," he spat, lunging for her. Elias drove his shoulder into Harlan's chest, pinning him to the wall. "Run," he told Clara, voice tight. She hesitated, then bolted. The ledger clutched tight. Elias held Harlan down, taking a fist to the jaw before landing a blow that left the man gasping. He stumbled after Clara, the house waking behind them. Shouts, boots, the bark of dogs. They reached the stallion, Clara already mounted, and rode hard. The ledger a heavy prize. By dawn, they were miles away, hidden in a canyon's embrace. Clara sent the papers to a rival rancher in town, a man hungry for Harlan's downfall. Word spread like wildfire. Harlan's empire crumbled under lawsuits and betrayal, his allies turning as the truth of the massacre surfaced. Elias and Clara settled by Cottonwood Creek, building a cabin from felled logs, its walls weathered, but theirs. Clara planted sage, its scent a quiet defiance. Elias's ribs healed slowly, but his hands never stopped working. One dusk, he gave her a silver ring, plain and uneven. "No promises but work," he said. Clara slid it on, her smile soft. "That's plenty." Years passed, their cabin worn by laughter and time. Harlan's name faded, a ghost in the dust. By the creek, under a sky wide as freedom, they shared burdens, grief, fear, hope, knowing no shadow could claim them now. This tale of Elias and Clara, carved from dust and defiance, ends with a cabin by Cottonwood Creek, where freedom was won through courage and truth. What moved you most? Their fight, their bond, or the fall of Harlan's empire? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what stirred your heart. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I'm grateful for every moment you've spent with me. Until we meet again, under the wide western sky, keep chasing tales that spark the soul. If you're hungry for more, tell me, what's the next story you'd want to hear by this creek?